and welcome to the Rental Realm, where transparency meets opportunity in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Nicole, traveling full-time in an RV, connecting with real estate agents and investors across the U.S. to give you an inside look at what's really happening in our rental markets. From short-term to long-term rentals, we're uncovering the numbers behind these deals. And today I have Christine here with me, and we're going to get to hear a little bit about up north. We haven't really discovered anything up north yet. So Christine, I am so excited to have you here today, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Nicole. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Super excited to hear about your market, because I actually have a client that's looking up there with you right now. So excited to hear a bit about your market. And just to start off, would love to hear what actually got you into real estate.
Sure. Yeah. So I am in the Boston market. I'm just outside of Boston. It's not a really popular market for people out of state to get into because our cost of housing is pretty high here. I'm going to share a little bit more about that though, and where we are up here. And I will say, I probably truly got started when I was about 22. And I moved back to Boston, maybe 23, from Seattle. I lived in Seattle a couple of years, came back to where I went to college, and I grew up in Connecticut. So came back to New England, and I was reluctant to rent. And so I said to my mom, I said, would you loan me $30,000? Because I could buy a condo for about $220,000, and that would help me with the down payment. And I really think I can turn this one bedroom into a two bedroom. So my first purchase was when I was about 23. It was a house hack. And I turned this one bedroom into a two bedroom. And then I had a roommate move in. And that was really awesome because it got me in the game early. And that's where I discovered really my love of real estate, which I didn't really nurture again until my 40s, about 5 years ago. And I love real estate. And 5 years ago, I just lived in my primary residence and sold that house. My husband moved into that condo. We bought another condo, and then we bought a single family several times over. Right now, my more recent history is 5 years ago. I got really clear on what my vision was for myself and my future. I was making some changes in my career and in how I spend my time. And I really kept seeing this beach property in my vision. And I didn't understand it because I was shifting careers and I didn't think of this as a career, but I saw one of my deep desires for my life was to have a beach property. So I started to look around. I really thought it was 5 to 10 years in my future when I had that vision. I started to look around on Cape Cod, which for those who are not familiar with the Northeast is where most people from Boston will go to the beach. It's a really popular summer vacation destination. Rentals there have been around for a long time, though they've mainly been in the past before Airbnb were really run by real estate agents. And I started to look and I found something. And the first thing I found, I went to go see, and I knew it was for me. It was a place that had been sitting on the market in a town that we liked, about an hour and 20 minutes from where I live now. It was on the market for, I think, $380. It was a house with a cottage, adjacent cottage, and super cute, great setup for families, and a lot of extended families come and rent places. So I knew I could sleep about 12 people. And this place was in really not great condition at all.
A lot of the houses up there have been around for a while and need some work when you're getting started.
Yes, so true. And our experience renting places on Cape Cod, I grew up going to Cape Cod for a week in the summer. We'd rent a cottage. And my husband and my experience was that we'd find these places that were in our price range, but they looked like grandma's cottage that hadn't been updated in a long time. And we really didn't want that experience for vacation. And we thought, gosh, this is so interesting. Why aren't more places updated? So we had the vision to turn this, it hadn't been occupied in a year. It was an estate sale, and to turn it into something more modern. So we bought it. I had the vision in September. We bought the property. We closed on it November 1st. So instead of 5 to 10 years, it only took a few months. But that's what really got us started in real estate investing. It was, I wanted this to have a beach house. And so we fixed that up over the pandemic I have 3 kids. They all participated in that because they were around. They didn't have all their sports on the weekend. So we went down together. We worked on that. And then we started renting it out. And it's been a fully booked rental seasonally anyways. And then a lot of the off season, we've been able to fill it as well with midterm rentals ever since. So that was 5 years ago, 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations. That's so exciting. And love the whole story of, gosh, when you were in your 20s. Did you have someone around you that was doing that? Or you just kind of had your vision for that too when you started? And you're like, I'm going to turn this into a 2-bedroom and have roommates. Because I think a lot of us have the aspiration in our early 20s, but we're just terrified. And that's still possible. Maybe not in Boston. Hard to do that now, but still possible in other places to start off with $20,000, $30,000 in smaller markets in the country.
Yes, exactly. Not here so much, but a lot of other places. I was inspired by a friend of mine. She came into money and through her family and bought a house. So when we all thought, gosh, she was a couple of years older than me, but she was in her mid-20s buying a 4-bedroom house. And it was so smart, actually, because she had 3 roommates move in and they were probably paying the mortgage for her. She updated the house as she lived there. So I think I saw that. And I really think this is true of any big leap. When we see the evidence of someone else doing it, it gives us confidence that we can do it too. And so that's very much what happened. I think seeing my friend Brooke do that gave me a lot of confidence. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I don't think about that a lot.
1,000%. And it's nice to have that reassurance of it can be done and that it can be done well too, because for a lot of us, that's what's holding us back. And so many people I've talked to that are in real estate now, the hardest part for them was getting started because they didn't have friends doing it or family, and they weren't even able to really talk to it about their friends and family. So they're looking for that community around them of, is anyone actually doing this crazy idea that I have? And if so, how did it go? And I think most of us kind of got started of like seeing one other person do it. And that's how it was for me with short-term rentals, of seeing one person that was my coach at first. I was like, oh, wow, you're able to do that and earn that much money, which mine didn't go too great, but we still learned a ton from it. And that's what it's really about at the end of the day, is just taking every learning lesson we can from these experiences. And tell me a little bit about, as a real estate agent, I don't know if I pointed that out in the beginning, but you're actually a real estate agent in Boston now. And so when you're helping clients evaluate rental properties, what are you really looking for to identify a strong investment property up there? Because I know it is pretty expensive up in that market now. So what are you telling your clients or having them really do some research on, or helping guide them in the right direction?
It's really true. So when folks are looking for a place around the Boston area, we're looking at communities where there's opportunity to run a short-term rental. So the city of Boston, the city of Cambridge, those communities are out because they're really restrictive with their short-term rentals. So we're typically looking outside of Boston. And what I really work with my clients on is looking at what are things renting for right now. So we'll look at AirDNA, we'll understand the rules and regulations, make sure that they can run a short-term rental. And then also thinking about, well, if the short-term rental market isn't available in the future because regulations change, what does it look like to have a midterm or a long-term rental in this community? How would it perform based on the community and the amenities and what's happening around? So generally, Boston area, I think we are very compact up here. Things are really close together. There's a lot of demand. We don't have enough housing to meet, enough supply to meet the demand. So I think, like, generally, if you're close to the city, you're probably guaranteed you can at least sell the place in a couple years and make your money back. I don't think you're going to lose money if you say you decide you have to sell or your short-term rental's not working out. But really what I'm trying to help people think about is, what are people looking for? So proximity to the airport, proximity to hospitals. We have a lot of universities here. I have 2 short-term rentals in upstate New York in a community where my daughter's in college, and those do really well because not only do you have the parents that are coming, but you have visiting professors, you have people coming to look at the college, you have graduation is a huge moneymaker. So there's a lot of opportunities with that. We are near the coast, so we do have a lot of coastal towns. And recently I have been looking at what are some communities near the coast where people can have beach access and access to parks. We have a lot of state parks around here too, which are really great. And amenities. So like, can I get to work? Am I close to the commuter rail? We're thinking about things like that for the short-term rental market. So they can, attract the type of people that are looking for many of those things.
I love it.
Yeah, I will say too, the Cape Cod market, which is where I have 2 beach houses now, has become more saturated, but there's still pockets. I've just invested in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So that's halfway between here and Cape Cod. It's my first flip that we're about to start on. And that market has some of the same attraction as Cape Cod, yet it's not as expensive yet. It hasn't been, I think Cape Cod is peaking right now, or has peaked, where Plymouth has not yet, but it's still a great community for so many reasons. So there are pockets and places where I think people can get in at a lower price point and grab a great short-term rental or mid-term rental.
And Boston was actually where we started learning about short-term rentals when I was living in Boston for 6 months. Before I got into real estate, I was helping a gym in Newton up there, and we started to learn about short-term rentals, and we were looking in Boston and we're like, oh, it's not possible to have a short-term rental like in this city. And when you're getting started in that, it's hard to know unless you're in that market and doing short-term rentals, because it was very tough for us coming in as newbie investors. And we're like, is it even possible to find a place here? And so we actually kind of gave up after doing a little bit of searching, and we're like, we'll go somewhere that it's easier regulations. But it's great to know someone that is really like you're in short-term rentals, the different little pockets, because it's hard there and it's expensive in some of the areas where it might be, oh, this is an easy market to enter into, but maybe the prices aren't going to be fitting your budget either. And some of those Cape Cod places, we got to spend some time over there too. And it's just magical little place. I love it over there. And Boston's actually one of my favorite cities. So I really enjoy going there, and there's so much to do. And I guess I never thought about it as much for the college standpoint, but you probably are getting a ton of people coming to visit their kids, and there's so many different schools there. Oh my gosh, we're working with some of the students at our gym, and it's a great market though to get into. I don't think a lot of people, as you mentioned before we jumped on, that not many out-of-state investors are looking to necessarily come into Boston. It's, I think, more people that grew up there, really know the market, have been there their whole lives.
Right. And if you can get in, if you have the cash to buy a 3-family in Boston and do a long-term rental, and that's what you are looking for, they're here to be had for sure. Absolutely. And then I think for people that are thinking more strategically, want to do short-term rentals, we can certainly find communities, and we are finding those communities where you can get in with a down payment that's more digestible for folks, right? But in Boston, to buy a multifamily, like a triple decker, we often call them here, you're talking $1 million minimum. So very different. And I do work with investors as a real estate investing coach. So I have a couple markets in the South and in other places that tend to be like some go-tos for me. And then other times people will come to me and say, I really want something in Florida. And I say, okay, where in Florida? And we get into the market and we really understand it. And we look for agents like yourself, Nicole, who know the market well and can support us. And then I'll hand that client off to someone else who really knows that market. But it's a lot different to be able to go into a market and find a property for, say, $400,000 or $500,000 that can generate really good cash flow as a short-term rental, as opposed to up here. They're here, they're just harder to find.
1,000%. And are there any specific property types or neighborhoods in the area that typically have higher yields for investors that you've seen so far, or it's really just finding those deals when they're coming by?
Yeah, I think it's more about finding the deal. It's more about figuring out, of course, like the money is always made on the purchase. So being able to get in at a lower price point, finding things maybe before they come on MLS in communities that allow short-term rentals where the price point is a little bit lower. Some of them can still generate as much cash flow as some of these communities where the entry point is twice as much. So down along the south coast of Boston, you can get in, you can get waterfront views, you can find places under $1 million, sometimes under 500. So just depending what community you're in, what you're looking for, there still certainly are some deals to be had there.
That's good. I didn't know there were prices that low still there. So that's good to hear.
Yeah. But you have to know where, and you have to understand what the community's like, because it really can differ. But I like to look outside of this area and find other areas where I think there's opportunity opportunity too. For example, we purchased in Syracuse, New York, because not just because they have a great university community there and a lot of traffic coming in and out, but there was industry that was going into that city. There's a big company that has been starting to build infrastructure and has promised to build a $1 billion facility north of the city. And we heard that and we learned about the community and we felt like we know that we could always long-term rent our property, but we took a chance on being able to short-term rent it as well. And we had some experience with short-term rentals in the area and felt like we can do this at a higher level. And we've been able to do that. So that's been really fun to go in there and learn a different market and learn to manage a property from remotely to an extent. We've got help on the ground. But yeah, so I enjoy that too. I enjoy finding new places and new opportunities.
Because there's deals everywhere. And that's what it's really about, is being willing to put in the work to find those deals, because it's not easy anymore. And even when you join, I'm sure you're in just as many Facebook groups as I am for off-market deals. And there's a lot of wholesalers now that are posting deals, and I'll have a client say, this person said it's making $8,000 a month and it only is $2,000 a month for the expenses. I'm like, probably not the case, but let's look at the numbers more. And it's really doing some deep dives. And definitely, I feel like off-market deals can be where you're able to find better price points, especially for getting into short-term rentals. And would love to hear a little bit of the breakdowns for your properties or properties for investors that you're working with, of like the average returns that they are seeing for short or mid or long-term rentals. Because I know down in Florida, long-term rentals, really hard to cash flow at all at this point. So are you guys seeing the same thing in Boston, or is it still possible to actually cash flow with some long-term rentals?
Yeah, I think it's possible to cash flow with long-term rentals in Boston. Again, I think it's more challenging just because the prices are so high, right? And when people are putting 25% down on a property because it's an investment property, generally those margins are really tight. So I say, if you're looking to cash flow, maybe get outside of Boston. We're finding, so because we got in on Cape Cod before prices really went up, we got into 2 properties down there. Those properties do really well. I would say we see a 20% cash on cash return on those properties.
That's awesome. Very good.
Which is really great. Not the norm. Although I do have clients right now, we're looking at some properties in the Smokies, in Texas, and we're seeing that type of return. And we're seeing it in other pockets too, other markets as well. But you have to really have to know how to crunch your numbers, work with someone who has done this before to make sure that your estimates are right. Or maybe you have a little bit of wiggle room. And if you don't hit that type of return, it's okay, but you can strive to hit that type of return. I do find too, a lot of people are saying, I don't know if you hear this a lot, Nicole, but people are saying, oh, that market is really crowded. Don't go there. Don't go there. And I think in any market with a short-term rental, you can stand out by really setting it up with the right amenities, by decorating it well, and by marketing it well. So I think like if someone really wants to get into the Smokies, which a lot of people say are really tapped out, I say if you've got a vision for something and you are willing and ready to execute on that, and you can see something that's going to be a little bit different, or you're willing to just make sure that it's managed really well and decorated really well, I think still you can see those same types of returns, or maybe similar, maybe 10 to 15% in a market that's already pretty saturated.
That's so accurate. And I'm actually going to be talking to an agent from the Smokies next week. And she is someone that she's focused on those luxury houses there, but they're doing a phenomenal job. And they have the rooftop views and just are these pure luxury homes, but they are running them out as short-term rentals, and they're doing phenomenal. When the Smokies, a lot of people right now are saying, avoid the Smokies, it's too saturated. And it's the same in most of these big cities at this point. In San Antonio, where we're helping out, I think there's more than 6,000 in San Antonio now at this point that are short-term rentals. But when you're looking at the market, there's not all that many properties that are making them super fun. And it's not at the point now where you can just get away with, I'm going to throw a game room in and we're good to go. That used to work a few years ago. If you had a game room, that was awesome. Where now you need to really look at your area and see, what is everyone already currently doing that are the top performers? And what could I add on top of that to increase my revenue over theirs. And I've seen some cool things of people doing. Mike Alfonte has, I don't know if you've seen his, but he has some amazing properties where they do saunas where you're on the deck and being able to overlook the view and just having all these crazy amenities that no one else is really offering. And he has all of it. So it's not just doing different ones, but having the hot tub, the pool, the sauna, the crazy game room. I've seen people now starting to do golf simulators, and I've not as much in my markets, but I've seen the pickleball courts that people are putting outside.
Yes. We thought about doing that at our property on the Cape. We really thought about that. And I think it could do well.
I could see that being a huge hit in that market.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in a historic district, so the permitting for it felt like it would have been a lot. And we were also in the middle of another project, and we haven't really come back to that. But I still think about that. And I'm not a pickleball player, but I know it's so popular. The sauna I could really get behind because I'm really into that myself.
There's so many cool things you can do now. And sometimes you have to be the first person to test it out. And I think that's where a lot of us do get scared when we're trying to add new amenities into the properties too. If it's not in our market and we don't, like we talked about earlier, if we see someone else doing it and being successful, we're like, oh, I can do that too. But when we're the first one to try it in our area, that's scary. But a lot of these people, they're the first ones to try it and they're seeing these great returns, and his properties are ones that are doing over $200,000 a year. And they're in not the most popular of areas where sometimes they're towns where I'm like, I haven't heard of that area. And I've traveled a whole bunch throughout the US and it's still an area where I'm like, I haven't heard of that place. So you can be successful in all these different markets, just as you were saying, knowing what amenities you need. And I think you brought up such a good point of the regulations earlier, not of just looking at the current regulations, but also what's the possibility of the future regulations in your market? Because in markets where you're at, that's a high possibility where they're just going to say no more, or they're limiting or cutting off. And in those markets, are they just at this point, they grandfathered people in, or are you seeing them start to just say no more short-term rentals? We're going to actually shut short-term rentals down.
Yeah. So I think in Boston, the last I knew in Boston, and I think this is still true, is that you could have a midterm rental in the same building if you lived in the building. Maybe you could have a short-term rental in your own property. So they're not like banished altogether, but it's pretty strict. You either have to live in the building or live in the unit and then rent out a room. And I think in a major city, like that's more common because they're trying to protect their hotel and traditional hospitality business, right? On Cape Cod, I know in the town that we have the two properties, there's been talk of only allowing people to have one or two properties because they're concerned that people are going to come in and just buy up everything and that the locals will not have any place to live. And I empathize with that for sure. And definitely think that there's some merit to some regulation. And people have been vacationing on Cape Cod for ages, and it's really just now that it's easier for people to rent there because of Airbnb and because of the platforms and the marketing that people are using, right? So yeah, I think it's just a little bit trickier. I totally agree with you on the amenities too. And like the other thing about the amenities we've thought about is like the return for the expense, right? We put a hot tub in one property last spring, and, you know, we've had to have someone maintain it on a regular basis. And then we've had a little bit of challenge keeping it off when we don't have guests. And then when we have guests coming, making sure that it's heated before they arrive. So things like that, like you just have to think about. We thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool to put in 5 holes of a mini golf course? Then we thought about like the expense of that. Maintaining that would probably be pretty expensive. You have to keep it clean. You have to care for the greens. And it's not necessarily as, it sounds fun, but I don't know that we'd get enough people coming and using it, right? Because there's a lot of mini golf on the Cape. Maybe. I don't know if that's quite enough of a draw for people. Maybe it's something that their kids would be interested in. So we didn't pursue it.
I think your market is just what really is going to determine all of that. And you have to look, like in Florida, you need a pool in Florida if you're looking for properties. And ideally, funny enough, you want a hot tub too. You wouldn't think that we need a hot tub in Florida, but we're dealing with one right this second at one of the short-term rentals. That's the pool heater and the spa heater aren't working anymore. And yesterday dropped $180. Today are dropping another $180. And this one was a built-in spa, so it's not just a standalone one. But those can get pretty pricey for people that are thinking about adding one. I think in the markets that I'm in, they are worth the return most of the time, and you can get away with charging. Most of our properties, we don't actually charge for heating the pool or spa. We just kind of build that into our fees. But something you do need to take account of in the pool, like in Florida versus Texas, we have to pay $200 for weekly service in Texas, where in Florida it's $130. So we're paying $70 extra every month for the same service, just in different parts of the country. We don't even have a hot tub in these ones in Texas, but we have to pay extra for it just because it's not as much in demand versus Florida. Every other house seems to have a pool. So you definitely have to think about those extra expenses that you're going to be incurring when you do have those amenities, but you have to really take a look. And going through AirDNA, that's awesome now. They can actually look and see and compare houses with or without a pool, with or without a spa, with or without being pet friendly. So you can really start to deep dive a lot more now than you used to. You could do it before. You just had to do a lot more work to really determine, look for the ones that had a pool, look for the ones that were pet friendly on Airbnb, and a lot more groundwork there.
Right. Yeah. AirDNA is great for sure.
And I use Price Labs too. I don't know if you have used Price Labs for their market dashboards, but that's another great tool to be looking at. And so what are some common mistakes that you're seeing new investors make when they're projecting their rental income up in your area?
I think that people, they get really excited about an area. I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but I think people get really excited about an area as a second vacation location. And so they want to buy property thinking, oh, no problem, it'll cash flow. But you really have to look at the numbers and think about the off season and think about the fact that it is more challenging to bring people in the off season. And yes, you can midterm rent in the off season. It does require a little extra effort that I think not everyone is aware of, because you've got to know how to market a midterm rental. It's a little bit different, and it can be a bit more legwork and more about building relationships than just throwing it up on Airbnb. So I think really understanding that is important for people. I think also really crunching the numbers and realizing the pros and cons of having a co-host. I think for most of my investors, it makes sense to have a co-host and have someone helping to manage the property, and finding the person that really understands, like yourself, like all of the components. So I had an investor, she has one property, she wants to look for another one. And she shared with me the current one that she has. And it's a great property. It has a ton of 5-star reviews. And now she's wondering, why isn't it booking in the shoulder season or the off season? And they don't have professional photos. Professional photos, like that is table stakes. There are certain things that you've just got to have. And even if you think you're a pretty good photographer, iPhone photos,
they don't cut it.
They will not cut it next to professional photos, right? And then, yeah, so I think really understanding that you either have to take that on or hire someone to help you market it, a co-host who knows what they're doing, or another third party, so that you're reaching people and that you're also coming up in a market that maybe has 10 pages of listings. You're coming up on the first page. So understanding how to market your property and how to get that first page, maybe second page placement so that people find you, because otherwise people just won't find you. And then you just lose any of the traffic, especially in the non-busy times. I think in the high season, no problem. But if you want to be busier in the off season, that's kind of required. And really having a good calculator and knowing how to calculate the investment and thinking about and putting aside funds for the long-term maintenance and things that do come up, because like you said, like things come up.
They're always going to come up. And I see that a lot of people don't project. I don't know if they're ignoring it and thinking, oh, I'm buying this newer house, nothing's going to be wrong with it. And even when it's not a newer house, I think every house that we've started with, the first, even new construction, one of our new construction houses that we started working with, the first month there was a leak coming from the roof, and we're like, it's a new construction house and we still can't get away with not having an issue. And that one was thankfully covered by the builder, but you have to be prepared for expenses to come up. And sometimes they are going to be really pricey depending on what you're looking at, but also the vacancy rates and the seasonal trends, because people kind of look at AirDNA and divide that by 12 for their gross number. And that's not how it's going to work out for I don't think there's any market I'm in where it's a nice flat line throughout the year of what we're seeing for seasonal trends. And I'm not actually familiar. So what are the seasonal trends up in your area? Like what are the busy seasons in that area?
On Cape Cod, we are always booked through the middle of June through the middle of September. So that's the busy season. That's when a lot of people plan on having rentals, and they'll open up 10 to 12 weeks in the summer. So it's pretty short, really. However, if you know what you're doing, I think you can capture the traffic that we do get. I would say really like May to mid-June. And then on the other side, it's mid-September to November. And I have 2 rentals on Cape Cod. They're both booked through early December every weekend. If not, I had a month-long rental in October. So there's people coming for different reasons. So if you're marketing it well, you will get people in. I had a woman in one of my rentals the entire month of a woman and her family for her son's wedding, the entire month of October. I have somebody that I get to respond to today that just asked me for like, come for New Year's Eve and stay for a month in January because I want to think about moving to Cape Cod and I want to know what it's like in the off season. So we've been fortunate to get some great off season guests, either like a 6-month renter or a 3-month, or this woman's a 1 month, which is great because at this point in mid-November, I'm happy to have somebody come and stay for the month of January. That's traditionally the slowest month. So we really do see it slow down, particularly January to mid-April. And then we'll see maybe a girls' weekend, a guys' golf weekend, weddings, a lot of weddings on Cape Cod. And we rent typically in the summer, we typically have a 7-day minimum and do Saturday to Saturday because that's the standard on the Cape. We have played a little bit with shorter, that we can typically do a shorter 3-night minimum, and then we can charge a little bit more for that. And then we've got some more turnover, which is fine. Really, it's not that big a deal. My cleaner probably likes that.
They love it when you have 2-night minimums. That's their favorite.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting though for the season. I would have definitely expected, I guess, more May to like the traditional summertime, but I think you can still get all those people. Even the times that I've went up to New England, it was wanting to see Boston and Cape Cod, but then also go up and see the leaves change colors in New Hampshire. So I think you can still definitely get people into October, depending on when the season is. And most of us have no idea when the leaves are going to change colors. We're just like, oh, October, it's going to be perfect time. And that's not how it goes. You just get lucky if you're there for that perfect week. But it's cool to see all the different trends there, and especially getting those monthly bookings in during your slower times, because for all the properties we have during slow season, if you can get someone in for a month, it's really hard to beat a month-long rental versus short-term stays during slow season with the occupancy that you're typically going to get. So we're always thrilled to have someone in for a midterm rental, especially like you said, January is, other than our Florida markets, like January is the slowest in every other market. And if we get someone that's interested, even if it's a little bit lower of a rate than we're offering for a midterm rental, which is usually already discounted, we'll never be able to make that up in doing short-term rentals during those slow periods. And I think being ahead of the game too, as you were saying, and really knowing how to market and advertise, because then everyone's going through the same thing in your market. It's not that just your property is the only one that's having slow season come January. And we've been finding more and more during those slow seasons, you really need to be finding other ways other than just being listed on Airbnb to try to get that traffic in. And so doing more legwork of looking in Facebook groups, being in your local community Facebook group and finding people that are coming in for whatever reason. And you'll get midterm rentals for the most random things. Even one of my friends the other day, her current midterm renter is someone that they have a mold allergy. And so her house is one of the only like new construction ones. And the lady lives in her same market, but she's like, your house is the only one without mold in the area. And so I'm going to come live there for a few months just to let my body, which I'm like, I've never heard of that, but you know, it works. And if it gets your place rented, that's all that matters. But you have to be doing a little bit more legwork for sure to get those midterm rentals in.
Yeah, 100%. You don't know, but it's helpful to kind of start to learn the reasons that people do come so that you can market it a certain way. And we have a duplex in Syracuse and we mainly midterm rent it. And I do that largely because I have not found our perfect match property manager co-host out there. And we do have enough help out there, though, that I have someone who can do like a handy person. I've got great cleaners. So I have enough staff. I like to have a midterm rental there so that I don't have the turnover that I'm responding to or my VAs are responding to all the time. Someone gets in there, they settle in and they're there for a little bit of time. And so we have it open as a midterm rental for the most part. And then, when we get closer, if we haven't booked it, we will open it maybe 1 week at a time for short-term rentals.
I think most of us short-term rental people actually love midterm rentals. I haven't met many short-term rental people that are like, no, I don't like midterm rentals. We're like, they're the easiest guest. I think we've only had one midterm rental guest that was a little bit of a hassle, and every other one, I'm like, they are lovely. I wish that our places could cash flow as much as a midterm rental as a short-term rental, but it's not quite there. But as we were talking about during slow season, some of those markets, I mean, for us in Florida, we can get some really solid mid 3-month rentals during peak season, which are outrageous rates where I'm like, I don't know who's affording to do this for their couple, but you get people coming in. One of my friends just had a place rented out they hit, I think she said $60,000 for this waterfront house in South Florida. They did a 3-month rental for $60,000, which I'm like, that's good for them. I would need like 40 people there with me to be doing that, but it is cool to see what you're able to do in these different markets for midterm and taking advantage of it when it's slower times and doing midterm rentals. And then as you guys are doing 7-day stays, and you kind of find your niche of what's the best stay. Because sometimes you can do better with those Saturday to Saturday bookings where you're not having any overlap. You're not having those blank days, which 1 or 2 days here and there doesn't seem like a lot. But if you're having that happen every week where you had a 5-day stay, then 2-day gap, and you're charging $200, $300, $400 a night, that eats away at a lot of the profit that you could see that month.
Yeah. And on the Cape, we're up to close to 1,000 a night. So in the peak summer. So losing that revenue, yes, definitely we feel it.
And how big of a property is that? What bedroom count is that you guys have?
It's a house with 2 bedrooms, plus it's got a loft upstairs outside of the bedroom. So that sleeps 2. And then we've got a sunroom. So there's extra sleeping, even though it's a 2-bedroom. And then it's got a cottage, which is just steps away. We never rent it separately. We always rent it together with the house. The cottage has 2 bedrooms and a loft as well. I mean, I actually had 13 people staying there this past weekend. I made an exception, but it's generally 12 people.
That's such a cool little property. I love that. And especially for the cottage having that much space, that's unheard of for cottages being like a 2-bedroom plus a loft. So that's very cool.
And it has a little kitchenette. I mean, it's perfect if you've got in-laws or your sister comes with you and she brings her kids and they want to stay over there, or you just put all the kids in there, like if they're a little bit older, of course. Yeah, people really like that. It gives everyone a bit more space. And that property is like sprawling. It's really spread out and long. The second floor is small, but the first floor is big. And it's just a great property. That was the first one. And I just knew it when I saw it. I said, this is a great home for a lot of family coming together, like would really enjoy this.
And do you see in that market that usually you want to have that bigger space, or can you still do really well with a just strict 2-bedroom spot?
You can do well with a smaller property. Our other property is 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and it's in the same town. And that one, we renovated that one as well. And we went over budget with the renovation. But I will say, like my husband and I always say, thank God we went over budget, because it's 3 years, I think, that since we've renovated it, and it still looks like it's really well done. The kitchen's a little bit elevated. It's got shiplap all over. We finished the basement. So that one does pretty well. The other one though, I would say, like, if you can get in with a bigger property that can sleep 12 people, then you've got multiple families or multiple groups usually coming together. They're splitting the cost. They're willing to pay more. And there's a lot of that, people vacationing together.
We were there. We had friends visit us, and it was just 4 of us in total. But just the whole style of the neighborhoods driving through and the style of the homes. If people aren't familiar, look up Cape Cod style houses. Like, they're the cutest thing ever. And I wish we had more houses like that around. Just love how it looks and appears. And it's like, you don't see that anywhere else in the US.
It's got an older vibe. I mean, we're an older part of the country, and it does kind of scream charm and a little bit colonial, and it's very charming. It's very different. That said, I think every community has its own unique charm, and that just is more unique about here for sure.
Absolutely. And we've talked about this some, but if you had one piece of advice in a competitive market like this, what's one thing investors should be doing to stand out and maximize their property's appeal at this point in time?
If we're talking about Cape Cod, I would say the professional photos, decorating it in a coastal style, really clean. I think that matters even more than having like a hot tub. I think a hot tub's great. People really like the hot tubs. It does extend the season a bit. But I find when I look at the properties that exist in the marketplace, there's more and more that are modern and renovated and clean and just keeping it simple, not a lot of clutter, a lot of white and light wood, and keeping the coastal vibes is kind of a necessary, like a need to have, and not having a lot of dark, heavy furniture and reds, deep reds and things like that up here. I just think that people really go for the light, newer, renovated vibes and then managing it well, right? Like you're saying, at this day and age, you've got to be managing the property well and getting great reviews to stand out, which I think happens through great service and a clean, well thought out property that's considering the guests and all their needs.
I think a lot of the houses there are still kind of the hobbyist host that started 10 years ago. Let's just say it was 3 years ago when we were up there and looking at all the Airbnbs in the area, and we weren't looking in Boston. We were towards the coast. And it was amazing to see how many people didn't have professional photos. They were not even taken on a new iPhone. They were old iPhone photos where it's like, this looks really bad, but this is kind of choose which one that looks the best to you, which I'm sure now it's changed a little bit, but it was really funny a few years ago to see how it was like the dark furniture and it just looked like it was someone's family house that's been handed down to them generation to generation, which it was still fun to go, and the house was in good condition overall, but it was definitely like the mismatched cups for your coffee mugs and just whatever that they had thrown together over the years. So you still have those for sure. It's just starting to get more competitive and people are finally starting to up their game.
Yes, I think so.
And do you have any specific advice for if we do get an out-of-towner that's wanting to invest in your market? Are there any advice you would give for out-of-towners trying to enter the market?
I think working with an agent that understands short-term rentals and is not tied to a specific area, because a lot of agents try to stay in their own area. I like to really find what's best for the individual and their budget. So if you're coming to the Boston area because you want a vacation home here or you want to invest here for whatever reason, working with someone that really knows the rules and regulations and is willing to dive into that with you and make sure that you understand that. And then knowing the growth potential, like thinking about the future. I always like to think about that and say, okay, is this an area that I think is going to be growing and appreciating in 5 years is important too. And then the other thing too is just knowing like the coastal areas, because, and this is probably similar in the South where you are, is you want to know where there's flooding and where to look out for, right? So you just want someone that's like going to look out for your best interest across all of the factors, because there's many of them, and can think like an investor, because it's a very different thought process. I've worked with several realtors in my past, and the way that I think about it feels very different because I am thinking about it investor first almost. Right? Would I buy in this market? And do I think this has long-term appeal? Do I think that this would rent really well? Does it have good bones? Can you add value to it? Can you create some equity while you're at it? Which is always a thought that I have when I'm buying a property.
My two favorite points is an agent that's looking to go into different markets, because a lot of them are stuck in their neighborhood and they're only familiar with not even a whole city, but just their particular neighborhood. And that's all they really know, which is great. If you're looking for a residential real estate agent that can help you in that neighborhood, or if you already know that you want to be in that neighborhood. But a lot of times investors are just looking of, I want to be in this general market. And now where the heck do I go? And they partner with someone that's only comfortable being in one little small territory, which a lot of times those might not be the best area for a short-term rental, and they don't even know if they're allowed. So that's where your other point of making sure like the agent can kind of have that investor hat on. Of most agents I work with, they're like, this is really pretty. This would be a great short-term rental. And I'm like, this would be a horrible short-term rental. There's no good comps in this area. It's not a good market for it. And it's not that they're being ignorant to it. They just don't know of what really it takes to be a good short-term rental. So having, I think, an agent that's really in either long-term rentals or an investor themselves in general is going to be so much more helpful because they are already looking out for you from an investor standpoint versus your typical agent is just like, this is a really nice looking house. I think it could do well as an investment property, yet you're going to be hundreds of dollars under what a long-term rental could be at that point.
Totally agree.
And last question, just to wrap this up a bit, but what is one thing that you wish you knew when you started investing, which I think you did a fabulous job when you started, it sounds like.
Thank you.
What would be one piece of advice you've had?
I think you just have to go for it. I would say, like, if I could do anything differently, I would have started earlier. I had a knack for it. And I think that's part of why I told that story about buying the condo. I had the vision for it. So I say, like, as soon as you can get in, if you're thinking about it, I think the thing that holds people back from investing is fear. And usually it's just a different way of managing and spending money than they're used to. So we all have these beliefs that are formed when we're young, and we tend not to challenge those beliefs and ask ourselves, like, is there a different belief that I could have that would change the trajectory of my life? If I adopted it, that would actually put me on a different path? Because usually it's not that you need to acquire more knowledge, it's that you need to change your mindset. So I've met a lot of people that have said, oh, I've read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Yeah, I've been wanting to invest for a while, and they're just sitting on it. And they're afraid to spend money, or they're afraid to tap into their home equity, or they're afraid to tap into some retirement, and maybe they've saved a lot. I'm not saying you should always do that. Everyone's situation is unique. But I do think, like, changing your thinking and seeing what other people are doing and just getting really curious and asking questions like, how did you do that? Wow. Or like, oh, tell me more about how a HELOC works. That's how I got started, is I had a HELOC on my primary residence that I had taken out for some other reason and I never used it. And it was just sitting there. And I said, wait a second, I think I can use this for a down payment of a new property. And so a lot of people right now are sitting on a lot of equity. And I think that that's a wonderful opportunity to tap into that. You can still get a decent rate on that. Tap into that for a down payment and then get started and find a property that works for you. Maybe it's also a vacation home, or maybe it just is something close by that you can cash flow, or maybe it's you buy out of state. Like, I'm referring people from New England to Texas, for example, because there's a couple communities there that I really like that are cash flowing really well. And I know they're going to appreciate because everyone and their brother is moving to Texas right now. But you've got to open your mind before any of that, I think, really even feels possible for people.
I love that advice so much and completely agree with everything you said there. So if someone wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Sure. I'm on Instagram at the Christine Fisk. And I also am on LinkedIn as well, and Facebook. Would welcome anyone just to reach out through any of those channels. And I'm happy to talk investing anytime. And yeah, it's been great chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here today. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and can't wait to hear more about your next investment. So stay tuned to hear more in the next few years.